All right. Good morning, everybody. I want to welcome us again to today's class, environmental management. Last week we looked at greenhouse gases. We were able to discuss extensively greenhouse gases, what it means, and the effect of greenhouse gases. So today we're going to be looking at global warming. It's like a continuation of what we've done last week. Okay, so today we'll be looking at global warming, what causes global warming, and what are the effects of global warming, and what can we do to actually avert this global warming. So those are the things we're going to be looking at today. Now, as a way of introduction, over the past 50 years, the average global temperature has increased at the fastest rate in recorded history. This is according to NASA, National Space Agency, USA, are the ones that came up with this particular record. That over the past 50 years, the average global temperature has increased tremendously to the point where it's beginning to have a great effect on the environment. They even recorded the record as shown in 2000. The research that was done in the year 2000 showed that between 2000 and 2016, the world experienced the 16 hottest years in a period of 134 years record. You can imagine that. A research that was done dating back over 134 years, NASA's experiment or record shows that the last 16 years, the world has recorded their hottest period. Even some persons even said, even the recent one that was done in 2015 also showed that if nothing is done to these global warming emissions, it is possible that the world will experience a surge to as high as 10 degrees Fahrenheit increase in temperature of the world. And that will have enormous calamity, not just to the environment, but to the lives that exist in the environment. So the question now is, what is global warming? How do we define global warming? Now, global warming basically occurs when carbon dioxide and other air pollutants, along with greenhouse gases, collect in the atmosphere and absorb sunlight and solar radiation that have bounced off the Earth's surface. Remember last week when we were talking about greenhouse gases, we talked about when there's rise in carbon dioxide, other pollutants, and greenhouse gases, when it becomes too much, what happens is that the radiation that comes from the sun, rather than being distributed in the space, they shield it. These pollutants and greenhouse gases and carbon dioxide shields it. Okay, so there's no way this thing can bounce off, thereby increasing the temperature of the earth crust. I gave an example when I gave us an example of an experiment. If you want to produce vegetable, even out of season, we said make a glass house, allow the light, okay, to be radiated from the sun. As soon as those heat penetrate into the glass, it becomes difficult for those heat to reflect or to leave that particular glass, thereby providing heat or light to the plants, the vegetables, both day and night. And we said that's the major, one of the major things that is one of the major strategies that is used to produce vegetables, even when vegetables is off season. That's the same thing that happens. So when this carbon dioxide and other air pollutants and green gases shield the atmosphere, it prevents this heat from being bounced back into the space. So it thereby accumulates, increasing the temperature of the earth crust. So global warming simply means the rise in the atmospheric temperature of the earth crust. And what is responsible for this rise in temperature is the accumulation of carbon dioxide air pollutants, and other greenhouse gases that collect in the atmosphere. Okay, so that is our definition of global warming. So when there's a rise or increase in the temperature of the earth crust, that is global warming. So what causes global warming? What is responsible for the global warming? Of course, like we talked about the greenhouse gases and other pollutants and the rest of them. We're going to look at them one after the other and see some of the things that cause global warming. We have the unmanaged garbage causes global warming. I'm going to explain them. We have emissions from automobiles is also part of it. Deforestation also causes global warming. And then we have industrialization also is responsible for global warming, and of course pollution. Now these are the ones that we're going to list here, but I'm going to give us other major causes of global warming, okay, as we listed them before now. So let's look at it. The number one is pollution, industrialization, and emissions from automobile can actually describe all of them together because they all involve release of air pollutants into the atmosphere. Just like I said, that over time, when this thing gets polluted, when this thing gets accumulated in the air crust, it begins to cause greenhouse effect or global warming. In our industries, especially in the petrochemical and the petroleum industries, and even pharmaceuticals and other companies, you discover that the rate of gas flaring is becoming on the increase. Okay, because it's been proven that any device, equipment, or machine that is powered with diesel or fuel must emit smoke or gases. And these emissions are being channeled into the atmosphere. So and that's why when you look at the chimneys of some industries, or you find the torch, you see great amount of gases being emitted from their space, from the industries, because these engines and equipment and machines are powered with the use of fuel or diesel and even other, liquefied substances. And so it contributes to, the increase or accumulation of these air pollutants into the atmosphere. And that becomes one of the major causes of global warming. Even bush burning, the same thing. Bush burning emits these things into the atmosphere, okay, and stuff like that. So those are some of the causes of global warming. Basically, the release of greenhouse gases into the atmosphere. When it becomes too accumulated, it causes global warming. And the sources of all these chemicals that I talked about are from managed garbages, deforestation, which is the bush burning that we talked about, from industrialization, the use of chemicals in the industries, allowing these things to be emitted into the atmosphere, excess traffic caused in our cities because of the release from our automobiles, and of course we have pollution from other sources and the rest of them. So those becomes the major causes of global warming. The cause of global warming. In US, for example, the latest, that was 2 years ago when Donald Trump pulled US out of the green nations, which was actually headed in by France, because he felt that enough wasn't actually done as far as global warming and gas flaring is concerned and the rest of them. So he pulled US out and then promised that he's going to develop a strategy or a policy to reduce the effect of greenhouse gases, which leads to global warming in USA. And ever since that time, since this pull occurred, there's been a great pressure on Donald Trump to come up with his own policy on how to tackle global warming. All right. So, what are the effects now of global warming? Now that we've seen the major causes of global warming, what are basically the effects? What effect does global on two sides? The effect of global warming as far as the environment is concerned, and then we also look at the effect of global warming as far as the health or lives of people living in the environment is concerned. Number one, we have what we call ozone layer depletion. I explained this last week, ozone layer depletion. We talked about the ozone, O3. Now, the ozone is actually like a shield in the atmosphere that functions for two major purposes. Number one is to trap the radioactive materials that are being emitted from the sun. That's number one. Number two, to also reduce the intensity of the heat, okay, that is being radiated from the sun to the to the earth crust. God specially made that ozone to perform this function. There are other things that happens in the ozone layer. Now you could see the importance of this ozone layer. Now, what happens when the ozone layer is depleted? What happens if the ozone layer is depleted? You see that the radioactive materials being emitted from the sun plus the intensity of the heat now falls to the atmosphere, to the earth crust. Okay, so ozone layer depletion becomes one of the major issues because these greenhouse gases that we talked about, when they rise into the atmosphere, it depletes. Okay, photodissociation reaction takes place in the atmosphere, thereby causing a hole, a very big hole in the ozone, and that becomes an issue. Okay, so that's one of the major effects of global warming. Another one that we need to also consider here is what referred to as excess evapotranspiration. Excess evapotranspiration. What does that mean? Now we know from our first class, I think I explained how when we're talking about the water cycle that helps to improve the climate and the rest of them, I told you that there are two major ways that water or water molecules gets back into the atmosphere after it has fallen as rain. Is either through evaporation from the water bodies or through transpiration, which is from the leaf, okay, of plants. So one of the effects of global warming is that you're going to have excess evapotranspiration. That is because the earth crust is heated, has been heated to a very large degree. There will be a lot of evaporation taking place. It's just like when you're boiling water, but the moment you put water on fire, what happens? You begin to see vapor. You begin to see vapor. The more the temperature is being increased, the more you see vapor. You understand? That's how the vapor to keep on evaporating until that place becomes completely dried up. So that's the same thing that happens in the earth crust. So when the earth is heated, okay, is heated up on a very high scale, transpiration and evaporation will take place. Even on the land, becomes so dry, as you can see from the picture. It becomes so dry and it begins to affect the lives of plants and animals because there's no much water again on the earth's crust because there's been excess evapotranspiration. That becomes an effect of global warming. And of course, the consequence of this excess evapotranspiration is going to cause excess rainfall because by the time these water vapors are accumulated in the atmosphere, we have excess of them in the atmosphere. Definitely, everything that goes up will surely come down. And no, that's why no longer in Nigeria do we have rainy season and dry season. I think the past 2 years now, there's beginning to be, a return of what we know as the rainy season and the dry season. But we've seen situations where rain will fall till in November, even till December, Christmas, the rain is still falling. But then when we're growing up, by September, the water body, the rain is already dried up, of bringing in a harmattan and the rest of them. Why? Because of excess evapotranspiration that's taking place. And of course, now another effect of global warming is the fact that when this rain is now falling, it's not coming down as ordinary water or rain. What we now experience what we call acid rainfall. Because remember, during this evapotranspiration, when these water molecules in form of vapor gets into the atmosphere, it's going there to meet the excess air pollutant and the greenhouse gases already been emitted into the atmosphere. So what's going to happen? The water molecules now react or mix with these molecules. These gases that have been fled into the atmosphere. So what we have now is no longer direct rainfall. What we're having is acid rainfall because there's been a reaction in the atmosphere. Because already these greenhouse gases, the carbon monoxide, dioxide, and other air pollutants are already accumulated in the atmosphere. So by the time the vapor rises back into the atmosphere, they get mixed up and then it falls as acid rainfall. And of course, we know the effect of acid rainfall. It has a lot of health effects. Okay, during the war, the Japan war, one of the major reasons why Japan signed a treaty never to go on war with any nation. If you're struggling anything with them, they rather give it up than go back to that. During that Hiroshima something war. After the dreaded war that wiped them, for years there was no rainfall. Why? Because of the so many, nuclear weapons and the rest of them that shielded rainfall for years. The day rain fell, they were so happy they came out to fetch water, and that even killed people much more than the war itself, because what we're experiencing then is acid rainfall. So that becomes under effect of global warming. We're gonna have acid rainfall that will have a very big effect, not just to the respiratory system, but the lungs and the liver, when these things are being taken in by animals or by plants. No wonder why you see the roofing sheets of every building turning white and the rest of them because of acid rainfall. Okay, so that's also another effect of global warming. How about melting of ice, especially glaciers? You know, in the first class, I give us a percentage of the atmosphere, the hydrosphere, the lithosphere, and the rest of them. We said 70% of the makeup of the earth is water. Water covers about 70% of the entire earth. Okay, so where we're just living is 30%. I could see, even from time immemorial, to be able to sustain that 30% of dry land, some water molecules have to be converted to solid molecules. And that's what gave rise to the glaciers, the icebergs, and the rest of them. They're supposed to remain solid in nature. Now, but what happens now when there is increase in the Earth's temperature, which is global warming? These glaciers and icebergs begin to melt. It begins to melt. Okay, not just the glaciers and the icebergs. How about the snow? Snow longer falls. Instead of snow now accumulating as solid water, they also begins to melt, and the rest of them. And when they begin to melt, remember that these glaciers are found in water bodies, the oceans and the seas. When they begin to melt, another effect of global warming is that there will be a rise in the sea level. And that was why most nations actually built a dam to be able to hold this, the rise in sea level, to be able to hold it. But there's a point where that thing will rise to. They have no options. Nations have no options than to open up the dam, because water has enormous power. When it breaks down the dam, the rate of flow of water into the mainland will be so catastrophic that it's ready to sweep everything that it sees its way. It has no mercy for anybody. That's why don't touch the water, don't cause any problem, because whatever, just like we established the first class, what we talked about, the theory of conservationalism and the theory of preservationalism. Preservationalism says don't touch the earth, leave it the way it is. If you don't touch the earth, if you leave it the way it is, it will not cause any problem for you. But when you cause problem for the environment will give you opposite of it. It will give you the same problem. I remember was it 2012, 2013 that we had that serious flooding in Nigeria. Cameroon was the first to open up their own dam, and then it swept into River Benue, into River Niger. Nigeria had no choice than to also open up their dam, and we could see the catastrophe caused in some regions, in Benue, in Delta, another in South as a whole. There was need to now start building camp, resettlement camp, because water swept people away. How about the flushing of dangerous aquatic animals into the ground, into the land, which started devouring people and causing a lot of issues and the rest of them? Why? Because there's been a rise in the sea level that caused the opening of those dams for it to sweep in. That becomes another effect of global warming. Now, another effect is also flooding, because by the time there's the dams are being opened, remember there is also increase in rainfall. The soil has a particular volume it can take. When the soil can no longer percolate or hold this water, what happens? It settles on the earth crust, and that can cause serious flooding. Especially those who live in a flood-prone environment, you know what that means. It's going to sweep their lives and their farmlands and the rest of them. So these are a whole lot of effect of global warming. How about forests and farms and cities? Facing a whole lot of troubles from new pests, okay, heat waves, heavy downpour, increased flooding. All these are factors that damage or destroy agriculture and fisheries. Okay, disruption of habitats. People are forced to leave their homes to relocate to other areas because of flooding. Okay, many plant and animal species go into extinction because they are being washed off. Okay, by this flooding. Okay, and then now how about to the health? We're going to also look at the effect of global warming to the health of people. But one among them is allergies. Okay, allergies, asthma, infectious disease outbreaks. This will become common due to increased growth of pollen produced ragweed. Ragweed actually thrives when there is global warming, when there is increase in heat temperature. Okay, so high levels of air pollution and the spread of conditions favorable to pathogens and mosquitoes. But by the time there's flooding, rainfall, and the rest of them, you have stagnant waters here and there, and these are breeding sites for these pathogens, and that can cause a whole lot of problems, you know, for people. So you see that the effect of global warming is so enormous that we cannot overemphasize it. So something needs to be done, okay, to avert the effect both on our environment and also on our ecosystem. Okay, but what is the solution? What is the solution to this global warming? What do we do to actually avert this? As you can see from the slide, number one is pollution control equipment. Industries should have pollution control equipment where these things are being channeled instead of flaring into the atmosphere. Nigeria is still struggling to produce 7,000 megawatts of electricity. 3 days ago, I read in the newspaper that it has fallen back to 1,255. We have been struggling for the past 20 years to increase our output as far as energy is concerned. And yet, we know how many metric tons of gases are being fled into the atmosphere. When these things cannot be rechanneled, recycled, to increase, to push our turbines and the rest of them. Because one of the major energy productions that Nigeria actually depend on is gas, you know. So why not get this pollution control equipment to be able to collect these gases in a gas collecting duct that can be used, even if you can even convert it to usable gases, both for cooking and the rest of them, rather than just channeling it into the atmosphere and then causing this lot of problems that we are having. That becomes one of the solutions. Plant trees is also another one. Avoid deforestation. Rather than deforestation, let's practice afforestation. Because somehow when there are plants and vegetations and the rest of them, it will help to distribute wind, air, and the rest of them, thereby bringing a cooling effect on the earth crust. So the need for afforestation becomes very, very important. We also advise to replace diesel and flood powered equipment with solar powered equipment, with electric powered equipment. Look at the innovations that are being done in the field of automobile. The innovations of how we can use, solar to power our cars, how we can use electric batteries to also power our cars. These are things that can help because any equipment that uses electricity does not in any way flare gases, does not in any way emit any form of gas. It's simply solar. So for those who are depend on solar, that's still the body of the car. You can just use solar panel to construct the body of the car and then connect it into a battery where as you're driving, as long as there's some level of heat or temperature, the whole body is trapping the solar energy, and they're being converted to mechanical energy that can help to power the engines and the rest of them. That becomes one of the ways to reduce emissions and global warming. And therefore, car batteries, just like we said, of course, many countries are now running on cars that have battery. And they said for each car must have like two batteries, and each battery can take you for close to 8 hours, as long as you're driving 100 kilometers per hour, can take you for 8 hours. So if you have the two batteries installed, you guarantee 16 hours. And there's also been now, just like we have filling stations where you can just drive in, so you can actually have where you can charge your batteries for less than 15 minutes. So while you're trying to take lunch or just read paper or something within 15 minutes, your car within 30 minutes, the two batteries are fully charged and can continue your journey. These are things being done to actually reduce the effect of global warming within the earth crust. So there are other things. Legislation is also another thing. Enact legislation within the country that can that can help to control, okay, the emission of gases into the atmosphere that causes global warming. We're going to be looking at some of those legislation that we're talking about, like there's one of 1992, the Earth Summit that held in Rio de Janeiro in Brazil, the United Nations Conference on Environmental Development. There are some policies and legislations that were also enacted, okay, there too. So we should practice the 4RP, process, which is prevent, reuse, reduce, recycle, and recover. These are some things that we can actually use. We call it 4RP, prevent. Why are we saying prevent emission of gases? Reuse these gases instead of just, flare them into the atmosphere, recycle them, reduce the number of gases that have been emitted, recover them for other purposes. That's the 4RP principle as far as environmental management is concerned. So these are some of the solutions, these are some of the things you can do to help us, reduce the global warming effect that it has on the environment. Now look at the glacier. This is a picture of the glacier. These are supposed to be. So imagine we have global warming, it begins to melt. And when the glaciers melt, what becomes the consequence? Just like we said, the major cause of melting of glacier is global warming. When there's increase in the temperature of the earth crust, that causes that. So effect of melting of glacier, those that suffer this most are those um, animals, especially animals that that depend on water or that lives on extreme cold environments, like the polar bears. I can see them. The polar bears, they have a lot of fur in the skin to be able to resist the excess in temperature, excess cold. Okay, that is the natural habitat. That is the natural habitat. Imagine when the whole ground begins to dry up. Okay, first of all, the glaciers begin to melt. By the time they melt, they begin to flow, and then it begins to dry up. What happens to the lives of the polar bear? It becomes an issue. Starvation becomes another issue. So, because some of these fishes, aquatic, especially the fishes and the rest of them, are being washed into the atmosphere, into the earth crust, and before you know it, there'll be lack of those things, which can also cause starvation, especially for those who depend on fish farming and the rest of them. So it becomes an issue. Okay, these are pictures before and after, what we had before and after. So you can imagine this is 2004, but look at what we're having right now. Okay, so let's proceed. Okay, these are different measurements, okay, that have been actually measured in some European countries. We have Edinburgh, okay, you have Newcastle, this Scunthorpe, all these Boston, Manchester, Norwich. These are, cities in the UK. Okay, in 2010, there was 7-meter rise. Then by 2014, there's been 13-meter rise, and currently now is 84 meters rise in temperature. So as I told you that there's been an increase in temperature. According to that NASA report I just told us, it said the last 60 years has been the hottest years in a period of 137 years. That will tell you how long, okay, how much this global warming that we currently have in our nations today. Okay, so that's also looked at the solutions of how we can solve this problem. Okay, solar power and afforestation and the rest of them. Okay, we also looked at the effect. I've already given us effect of global warming. Okay, so basically now let's look at the effect, okay, on health. This is what we have. I think I mentioned the predators, okay, the pathogens, okay, being given life, and those pathogens comes to affect, human life. Okay, there's starvation everywhere. There's degradation in the health of people. Okay, so the effect of greenhouse gases and global warming is enormous on the health of people, okay, living in such an area. That's why there's need to do a whole lot. So finally, before we finish this class, there's an interrelationship that exists, okay, between the atmosphere and, of course, just like I told you, when we define the environment, consists of air, water, plant, animal, like that, and there's an interrelationship that exists between them. So we depend on the environment, and the environment also depends on us. So whatever we give to the environment is what the environment gives back to us. If we flare the gases and all those things, the environment is going to increase its temperature, and the effect will be on us. If we reduce it, the environment will also reduce it. So that's the relationship that exists. There is nothing that we don't that we require in this life if not gotten from the environment. Okay. So yeah, I think I've explained the causes of degradation on human lives and the rest of them. So finally, because I have about 1 minute to round up this class, what can we do? What can we do? Let's go to that. What can we do to save our lives? Reduce the use of materials which produce greenhouse gases, avoid the burning of fossil fuel and household residues, upgrade infrastructures, practice afforestation. I think I've mentioned some of these things. Use alternative sources of energy like the solar and the battery. And then use eco-friendly materials. Incineration plants should be established. Pollution should be controlled. I think I've mentioned all these things as solution, not just to global warming, but also greenhouse effect. Okay, so like that. Clean energy for better world, the rest. All right. So what are your roles as a student in minimizing the effect of greenhouse effect? Form local student union to increase student participation. Thank God now we have extracurricular activities in JPTS where you can actually participate. Okay, so there's actually a club that promotes the environmental conservation, conducts afforestation programs, especially in urban areas to restore greenery and the rest of them. So these are some of the things that students would do. Okay. So I think that's the end of this particular class, greenhouse. So these are the international conventions I talked about. The Kyoto Protocol and that of the Earth Summit that held in Rio de Janeiro, where they came up with a lot of conventions on how to improve the environment. So far, so good. We've been able to deal on greenhouse gases and its effect, and also global warming, the causes, the effect, and the solution. So when we come next week, we'll continue from where we stopped. And I hope you guys were able to enjoy the class today. Thank you very much for your time, and I'll see us next week.